It's hard to imagine how different Star Trek DS9 would be with Laren instead of Major Kira. When Star Trek Deep Space Nine first premiered in 1993, it carved out a tone unlike any other Star Trek series. Grittier, more serialized, more politically nuanced, DS9 thrived because of the sharp contrast between its many conflicting personalities, none more important than Major Kira. Yet, in a parallel universe, the show could have launched with a totally different figure, Laren, the rebellious Byron officer from the Next Generation. The creative team originally wanted Michelle Forbes to reprise her role as Ro for DS9, but when she turned it down, they created Kira instead. This single casting decision didn't just change a character, it shaped the trajectory of an entire series. Trying to imagine DS9 with Ro instead of Kira is like imagining the station without the wormhole. Technically possible, but the entire DNA of the show shifts. Exploring the differences tells us a lot about why DS9 succeeded, why Kira became a franchise-defining character, and why Ro might have pushed the series in a drastically different direction. Laren, a tragic rebel who was never meant to be tamed. Before DS9 existed, Ro was already one of the most compelling secondary characters in the Next Generation. Her uniform was Starfleet, but her heart belonged to a people traumatized by oppression. She carried guilt, anger, and a deep sense of cultural conflict. Ro was fascinating because she wasn't comfortable anywhere, not on Bajor, not on the Enterprise, not even with herself. Her arc in TNG culminated in betrayal, siding with the Maquis, abandoning Starfleet, and choosing an insurgent life over diplomacy. If DS9 had used her, the show would have inherited all that emotional and narrative baggage. The writers would need to either undo her Maquis betrayal or build DS9 around it. Either path drastically shifts what DS9 becomes. Ro as a Maquis agent on the station could have turned DS9 into a moral battlefield much earlier. Ro return to Starfleet service would have undercut her defining moment in TNG. Ro as a liaison to Bajor might have felt more reluctant and conflicted than Kira's fierce patriotism. Ro was a powder keg, and DS9 was already full of them. Kira, a freedom fighter ready to lead, where Ro often felt trapped by her trauma. Kira arrived on DS9 already transformed by it. She wasn't a half-tamed rebellious lieutenant. She was a seasoned resistance fighter who had survived, adapted, and emerged as a political and military leader. Nana Visitor played her with volcanic ferocity, but also enormous emotional depth. Kira had fire, but she also had growth ahead of her, and DS9 shaped itself around her evolution from rebel to stateswoman. This distinction is critical. Kira wasn't running from her past. She was trying to build a future. She started DS9 with a defined role in Bajor's provisional government, deep connections to the station's geopolitical conflicts, a professional dynamic with Sisko rooted in respect and friction, no pre-existing Starfleet baggage to explain or erase. She fit DS9's premise perfectly, while Ro would have forced a massive rewrite of the show's leadership, politics, and early story arcs. The Sisko dynamic would be completely different. The relationship between Kira and Commander Sisko is one of DS9's foundational emotional engines. They begin as reluctant partners. She resents Starfleet's presence. He needs her support to stabilize Bajor. But gradually they become a deeply trusting, respectful duo. This would not have worked the same with Ro. Ro's authority in Byron politics was virtually non-existent. She wasn't a resistance leader. She wasn't connected to Bajor's Provisional Council. She wasn't respected by Byron factions. She was, in many ways, a Byron outsider. The role required someone who could stand up to Sisko and speak for Bajor. Ro could have given Sisko attitude. Kira gave him legitimacy. Furthermore, Sisko's emissary of the prophets arc hinges on Byron religious and political leaders taking him seriously, a process Kira helps facilitate. With Ro, who was far less religious, far less nationally invested, and far less integrated into Byron society, that arc becomes clunkier and potentially less emotionally resonant. The resistance backstory would hit completely different. Kira's past as a resistance fighter is one of DS9's most important pillars. It informs her trauma, her politics, her worldview, and her relationships with characters like Dukat, Odo, and Kai Wynn. Ro's backstory, in contrast, isn't built around the organized Byron resistance. Her pain is real, but it's personal, not political. She lacked Kira's specific history of guerrilla warfare, sabotage missions, and complex ties to other resistance fighters. Without Kira, the duet storyline loses impact. Kira's fraught relationship with Duca disappears. Her emotional journey through Cardassian Byron healing changes. Her mentorship of future rebel figures like Shakar never happens. Her eventual romantic connection with Odo lands differently. DS9 gets darker, but less political. More introspective, but less epic. Ro's stories were about individual shame and redemption. Kira's were about national trauma and rebirth. DS9 needed the latter to become the masterpiece it did. Major Kira anchored the Byron arc. Imagine DS9's vast Byron arc. Kywin's scheming, Vedic Baral's idealism, Shakar's leadership, the reclamation of Bajor's faith. Without Kira at its center, with Ro in her place, the show would have to answer uncomfortable questions. Why is a former Starfleet officer representing Bajor? Why would the Byron government trust her? Why is she the second in command of a strategic space station? The Byron arc becomes less convincing instantly. DS9's early episodes needed Kira's firepower to ground the setting. Her presence said, "This world matters. These people matter. Their struggle matters." Ro, a wanderer by nature, simply isn't built to carry that weight. The Odo relationship would change beyond recognition. One of DS9's slow-burn emotional triumphs is the eventual relationship between Kira and Odo. Their bond is built on years of mutual respect, quiet devotion, and the eventual revelation of Odo's love for her. With Ro, this dynamic would never emerge naturally. Ro and Odo share similarities, both distrustful of authority, both guarded. Yet they would likely clash more than connect. Ro doesn't have Kira's raw vulnerability, the thing Odo responds to most. Their chemistry would be colder, more adversarial, and far less romantic. Fans might get a tense alliance between loners, emotional distance rather than intimacy, a relationship defined by duty rather than love. It could be interesting, but it wouldn't have the iconic resonance Kira and Odo shared. The Dominion War would reshape Ro, not enhance her. Kira thrived during the Dominion War storyline because the arc let her evolve from guerrilla to general, from rebel to diplomat. Her leadership during the Cardassian resistance was one of the show's most powerful beats. Ro, ironically, might have ended up feeling overshadowed. DS9's war arc demanded someone who could navigate politics, military command, moral complexity, cultural identity. Kira embodied all of that. Ro excelled at personal moral conflict, but not the nuanced political decision-making required to lead armies, broker alliances, or coordinate insurgencies across an occupied planet. The Dominion War would have sharpened Kira. It might have crushed Ro. Ro's presence could have made DS9 too dark, too early. DS9 already pushed Star Trek into morally gray territory. Introducing Ro at the start